back to another episode of I See What You Did There, and we're back to the Stark family. Previously, I looked at how Robb's relationship with his wolf Greywind foreshadowed his fate. Now, for the rest of the Stark children, I'll be discussing what may happen to them in the upcoming seasons or books. The next Stark child I'll be taking a look at is Sansa Stark. Although Sansa's family sigil is the wolf, she is the most distanced from that symbol and what comes with being represented as a wolf. Instead, Sansa is surrounded by bird imagery in place of wolves. What I'll be doing today is examining the relationship Sansa has with both wolves and birds, and what this may mean for her character in the near future. Like the other videos in my Game of Thrones series, there will be spoilers for up to some excerpts of Winds of Winter, as well as the most recent season. Let's get started. Out of all the Stark children, Sansa's relationship with and influence on her wolf is probably the most obvious and literal. Ned describes Lady as being a perfect example of Sansa's teaching. Lady, he said, tasting the name. He had never paid much attention to the names the children picked, but looking at her now, he knew Sansa had chosen well. She was the smallest of the litter, the prettiest, the most gentle and trusting. A Game of Thrones. Lady's demeanor and appearance reflect her owner. She is gentle and trusting, and she's described as being pretty and small, suggesting she's the most delicate of the pack. Unfortunately, we never get to see Lady develop into a wilder creature, since Ned is forced to kill her. There is a small hint to this wild nature when Septa Mordane talks to Sansa about Lady constantly following her around. "You're a good girl, Sansa, but I do vow, when it comes to that creature, you're as willful as your sister Arya." A Game of Thrones. This line is extremely significant. Not only does it reflect the growing, and ultimately cut off, Stark nature developing in Sansa, but it's the only time Sansa and her sister are described as being similar. The first book constantly shows examples of Sansa and Arya bickering with one another, how they take after a different parent in appearance, and overall are very opposite of one another. It's only when it comes to Lady that Sansa questions or disobeys a rule, going against her usual calm and demure attitude. Lady, therefore, is a physical representation of her Stark nature. It's very telling, then, that Sansa begins to emotionally distance herself from her family after Lady's death. The symbol of her Stark heritage has been ripped away from her, foreshadowing what happens to her after her father's death. She has to actually distance herself from her Stark name in order to stay alive, denouncing her mother and brothers as traitors. Greywind and the other wolves help their owners detect when someone is being false or distrustful. Since Sansa no longer has her companion with her, she is more susceptible to lies, though this is also due to her naive and trusting nature. Sansa enters King's Landing without any sort of defense. It's the very center of lies and deception. It's no wonder then that she is effectively seduced away from her family until she learns the truth. After Lady's death, characters begin to address Sansa not as Wolf Girl, as Barristan Selmy does very early on, but instead as Little Bird. The death of Lady not only shows the death of Sansa's association with the Stark wolf, but the beginning of her association with birds. The Hound is the first one to point this out about Sansa, saying that she's been trained well in acting as a lady. "Some Septa trained you well. You're like one of those birds from the Summer Isles, aren't you? A pretty little talking bird, repeating all the pretty little words they taught you to recite." A Game of Thrones. The Hound is informing us that Sansa, while beautiful, isn't thinking on her own. She's been trained to obey, follow orders, and not act out of line. This makes sense considering her upbringing. She's led a comfortable life as a lord's daughter, and she doesn't think to question what she's been told. She lives in a fantasy world, believing in the best of people and not understanding that life isn't a song. At first, she is confused by the Hound's statement, but later on realizes the truth of his words. It isn't really that much of a stretch to see the caged bird symbolism when it comes to Sansa, when she becomes a ward of the crown. It's almost difficult to call it symbolism, since several characters point out Sansa's predicament. Someone take her back to her cage and see to that cut. A Clash of Kings. "I am loyal to my beloved Joffrey." "No doubt, as loyal as a deer surrounded by wolves." "Lions," she whispered, without thinking. A Clash of Kings. Being associated with birds shows the lack of agency Sansa has at this time. It's a symbol forced on her, not one she's chosen herself, and she slowly convinces herself it's true. At the same time, however, Sansa's growth as a character is reflected in the three types of birds that she's either associated with or surrounded by: the dove, the mockingbird, and the falcon. Dove. Although this is strictly in the show, Cersei's nickname for Sansa is Little Dove. A dove is a perfect representation of Book 1/Season 1 Sansa, small, delicate, and beautiful. Doves are often associated with love, which keeps in tune with Sansa's dreamy, romantic nature. Doves also represent grace, a common trait used to describe Sansa. White doves are known to be symbols of purity and innocence, which, again, describes Sansa perfectly in the beginning of the book. She doesn't know the evils of the world, and she doesn't have a violent nature. Sansa tries to settle arguments with words rather than fists. Cersei uses this nickname to patronize or look down on Sansa. She considers her to be a stupid, dreaming girl who is easily manipulated. This is a perfectly valid interpretation of Sansa, at least in the beginning. She's 11 years old, with no real-world experience, and is getting her first glimpse into how cruel and terrifying people can be. Sansa's character arc, therefore, revolves around that illusion shattering and her finding a way to survive in this world. However, there are aspects of this bird that continue to be a part of Sansa despite all the horrors she has endured. She's a very gentle and pure soul still, though a lot of her naivete has gone. She feels almost sorry for Joffrey's death, despite all the atrocities he's committed to her and her family. Sansa's gentleness is an inherent part of her personality. Mockingbird. The Mockingbird is the personal sigil for Petyr Baelish. He takes Sansa under his wing, spiriting her out of King's Landing and taking her to what is believed to be her only living family, excluding Jon Snow, her aunt, Lysa Arryn. Sansa takes on a new identity so that way Cersei won't be able to find her. She dyes her hair brown and claims to be Elaine Stone, Petyr's bastard daughter, or niece in the show. With this new identity, Elaine is now, like her father, taking on the Mockingbird as her sigil. Mockingbirds are associated with cleverness, intelligence, communication, and protection, which are all good examples of describing Baelish. Mockingbirds are known for imitating the calls of other birds as a means of protecting its territory. Baelish is exceedingly good at playing the right side to his advantage, and he tells Sansa that he intends to teach her. With my wits and cat's beauty, the world will be yours, sweetling. A feast for crows. At first, Sansa only sings the songs she's taught by Cersei, Joffrey, and the Lannisters. My father was a traitor, my traitor brother and mother. I love the king with all my heart. I was praying for the king's safety. I am only a bird, repeating the songs they have taught me. While she's in King's Landing, Sansa has to constantly be on her guard in order to survive. We begin to see some signs of her cleverness in her interactions with Joffrey, such as when she saves Ser Dantos' life. He is, Sansa said, a fool. You're so clever to see it. He's better fitted to be a fool than a knight, isn't he? You ought to dress him in motley and make him clown for you. He doesn't deserve the mercy of a quick death. The king studied her for a moment. Perhaps you're not so stupid as Mother says. A clash of kings. Sansa is very aware of her station and what people come to expect from her. As the series progresses, she begins to try and use that to her advantage, though most of it is rather subtle, such as her attempts to get Joffrey to fight in the vanguard where he's more likely to be killed. A gentle nod or push, just barely noticeable. As Elaine Stone, Sansa is hyper-aware of everything she says and does. As Sansa Stark, there were certain standards and expectations that came with being a noble lady. Now that she is posing as a bastard, she's able to move a bit freer. Some of the constraints forced on her are gone, allowing her to stretch her wings a bit and begin to learn the art of manipulation. In the show, we are given almost a literal transformation. Sansa dyes her hair black, dons black clothing to match Petyr, and a lot of her clothing incorporates feathers to represent her becoming the Mockingbird. Just as the Mockingbird copies the songs of other birds, Sansa shows some signs of this in A Feast for Crows and the Winds of Winter excerpt. One trait of hers that she really began to use to her advantage early on was her power of observation. By remaining quiet and making herself seem unimportant or stupid, people underestimate her, and she can become privy to important information. Tyrion often compliments Sansa on her ability to lie or keep up appearances. Lady Stark, you may just survive us yet. Sansa is starting to evolve. She is learning to take the songs that have been taught to her, and rather than just repeating them for survival, she is slowly beginning to learn how to manipulate people into doing what she wants. In the books, Sansa is hiding in the Vale under the protection of her cousin, Sweet Robin. Supposedly, Baelish's plan is to have Sansa marry the next heir to the Arryn line, Harry Harding, and when they are married, to reveal her true identity. She can then rally the Arryn forces to take back Winterfell, and she would be both the ruler of the Vale and the North. It's up to Sansa, as Elaine, to seduce Harry and make him fall for her. In the chapter excerpt George R. R. Martin recently released, we finally start to see Sansa using her experiences from King's Landing in a more manipulative manner. She tries to embody Cersei. Tears are not a woman's only weapon. You've got another between your legs, and you'd best learn to use it. A clash of kings. She also takes advice from her mother. A lady's armor is her courtesy. A Winds of Winter. And she remembers the advice from Baelish. Life is not a song, sweetling. Someday you may learn that, to your sorrow. A Game of Thrones. He has a weakness for a pretty face, and whose face is prettier than yours. Charm him, entrance him, bewitch him. Winds of Winter. Sansa knows what it is she has to do in order to achieve her goals. Becoming the Mockingbird allows her to really show off the cleverness and intelligence that we saw small glimpses of in earlier books. Falcon. The Falcon is the sigil for House Arryn, the house Sansa's aunt married into, and the house to which Sansa is hoping she'll be able to marry into. By rallying the forces of the Vale as well as the North, Sansa is hoping to take back what was taken from her family. The Falcons therefore are her symbol of freedom and victory, which is what Falcons are normally associated with. Sansa is finally starting to come into her own at this point in the books. She has a set goal and plan beyond just surviving, which is all she's really been doing in King's Landing. She is finally able to start making some decisions on her own, although this is still Baelish's plan and manipulations. However, the hope here is that Sansa is able to no longer need help from Baelish. Sansa is putting her hopes into Harry Harding, and we can sort of see some parallels between him and Joffrey. He's described as being handsome, but exhibits some mean behavior towards Sansa at first. Joffrey was comely too, she reminded herself. A comely monster, that's what he was. Winds of Winter. However, by the end of the excerpt, we see that Sansa is slowly starting to win him over, something that she had previously been unable to do with Joffrey even really early on. For a moment, he looked shocked, but as the song was ending, he burst into a laugh. No one told me you were clever. He has good teeth, she thought, straight and white, and when he smiles, he has the nicest dimples. She ran one finger down his cheek. Should we ever wed, you'll have to send Saffron back to her father. I'll be all the spice you'll want. A Winds of Winter. It is only a small step for Sansa, since ultimately the plan as Baelish is not hers, but it shows that Sansa has a lot of room for growth and improvement. Harry, the young Falcon as he is nicknamed, will help her win back the land that was taken from her and her family. Sansa is beginning to play the Game of Thrones, rather than being played. She's taking an active part in this, rather than just casually observing. It's no surprise, then, that her intended marriage is to the young Falcon, since the Falcon is a symbol of victory and soaring above the rest. Sansa's evolution from Dove to Mockingbird to Falcon really shows just how much growth the character has gone through. She has been with us since the beginning, acting almost as a foil for the audience, who are unaware of the way the world of Song of Ice and Fire works in the beginning. However, what is most important for Sansa is that despite everything, losing her wolf, seeing her father beheaded, nearly being raped, and losing the rest of her family in a violent bloodbath, she is still optimistic. She is much more cautious about the world, but overall hasn't lost her gentle nature. I can only hope that she can survive until the end, but knowing Martin, there's probably a lot more in stall for her. I really hope not. Seriously, D&D? Ugh. I know that the show has been taking a very radically different story for Sansa than book Sansa, and from where we left off, it's difficult to pinpoint if this will go back to the book's plot or continue branching off into its own. Therefore, most of the observations I've made here apply to Sansa's ending in the books, rather than the TV series. We're kind of at a wait-and-see stage with TV Sansa right now, but my hope is that she will eventually be able to return to the Vale. That, or stabbing Ramsay or Littlefinger in the face. Either one, really. Can you tell I'm not a fan of what they're doing to her on the show? It's hard to say whether or not Sansa will begin to exhibit more wolf-like behavior now that she is much closer to the north. Another possibility fans have been speculating about is whether Sansa will show off warging abilities like the rest of her siblings. Since her connection with Lady was cut off so early on, a lot of that development hasn't been addressed. Sansa occasionally dreams of Lady, but there isn't clear evidence to suggest it's a warg dream. Some question whether all the bird imagery means Sansa will warg into a bird. I don't believe that's the case, since it's said that one can get lost being in the mind of the bird. And after all Sansa's gone through, I think it would be a bit of a backward step to make her lose herself in that manner. And with that, thank you for joining me on this episode of I See What You Did There. Post in the comments below about what you think is in store for Sansa in the upcoming books and seasons. Do you think Sansa will warg? What is your opinion on her relationship to Littlefinger? And will she be able to take back the North? I'm curious to see what you guys think might happen. I'm Calluna, and thanks for tuning into I See What You Did There. See ya!
Geek Vision.